A father lost everything when his family entered a vegetative state after a terrible accident. Caught between science and despair, he receives a mysterious medallion from a stranger. When heaven speaks, listen. Revealing dreams, inexplicable coincidences, and a waterfall in the Appalachian Mountains pave the way for a journey of faith. During the winter solstice, 3 blue butterflies signal the impossible. His daughter moves her fingers. A story of hope where heaven and earth meet. Prepare to be moved. The rain punished the asphalt that autumn night, as if the sky shared the pain about to flood Ethan Miller's heart. Thick drops beat against his office window as he finalized the structural calculations that would ensure the safety of another building. Fate's cruel irony. The man who dedicated his life to building unshakable structures was about to see his own world crumble with a single phone call. His cell phone vibrated on the glass desk. The hospital's name flashed on the screen like a dark omen. And so, in the choked voice of an unknown nurse, Ethan received the news that split his life into before and after. "Mr. Miller, your wife Helen and your daughters, Anna and Lucy, were in a serious accident on I-90. They're alive, but in critical condition." Time froze in that instant. The raindrops seemed suspended in the air, much like Ethan's own breath. The project folder slipped from his hands, scattering papers across the floor, papers that seconds before were his only concern. Now, they seemed as insignificant as dry leaves swept away by the wind. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. Ethan walked those white corridors like an automaton, his steps echoing on the immaculate vinyl floor. Behind the ICU doors, he found what remained of his family. Helen, the wife he'd met in engineering school, and the 6-year-old twins who still slept clutching identical teddy bears, were now connected to machines that beeped in a monotonous rhythm, almost like a sinister lullaby. "Persistent vegetative state," explained the doctor, a man with tired eyes and an impeccable lab coat. "The brain injuries were severe. The chances of recovery," a painful pause, "are practically non-existent." Words pierced Ethan's chest like invisible bullets. He, who had always trusted numbers, equations, the predictability of physics and mathematics, now faced a merciless statistic. 99% probability against his girls waking up, against Helen's smile, against the life they had built together. "But there's 1%, Ethan murmured, clinging to that tiny fraction like a drowning man to the last piece of driftwood from a wrecked ship. The doctor merely nodded, with that look healthcare professionals reserve for family members who haven't yet accepted the inevitable. A look of pity. Ethan hated him for it. The days dragged on, merging into weeks of a somber routine. From his apartment to the hospital, from the hospital to work, from work back to the hospital. Ethan lived on autopilot, like a gear programmed to turn even when the rest of the machine had stopped working. On his first Sunday after the accident, while walking down the corridor he already knew by heart, something unusual happened. An elderly woman with snow-white hair and time-etched skin appeared beside him, as if she had materialized from the white walls. Her eyes, a surprisingly vivid blue for someone of her advanced age, fixed on Ethan's. "When heaven speaks, listen," she said, placing a small golden medallion depicting the Virgin Mary into his hand. Before Ethan could respond, or even process the strange encounter, the woman disappeared around the corner, leaving only the echo of her slow steps and the medallion that now warmed his palm. Ethan, a man of science to the core, almost discarded the object. What use would a religious symbol be to someone who had never willingly set foot in a church? But something, perhaps the gentleness with which the woman had given him the gift, perhaps the unusual warmth emanating from the metal, made him slip the medallion into his pocket. That night, exhausted, he fell into a deep sleep. And then, the first sign came. In his dream, he saw himself before a waterfall with crystal-clear waters dancing over dark, mossy stones. The sound of the water was hypnotic, almost like a voice trying to tell him a secret. 3 vivid blue butterflies, the same blue as the mysterious woman's eyes, flew in circles around him, eventually landing gently on his outstretched hand. Ethan woke up with his heart pounding, and an inexplicable sense of urgency. The dream had been so vivid, so real, that he could still feel the mist from the waterfall on his face, the delicate touch of the butterfly's wings on his skin. He got up impulsively and went to the bookshelf where they kept the family albums. He flipped through them frantically until he found what he was looking for. Photos from their last trip together 2 years ago to the Appalachian Mountains. And there it was, crystal clear as in his dream, the same waterfall. In the pictures, Anna and Lucy, their brown hair in identical braids, ran after blue butterflies, while Helen smiled, her feet dipped in the cold water. Pipevine swallowtails, Ethan read from the caption written by Helen, a biologist by training and a teacher by vocation. Rare at this altitude but abundant at this specific waterfall. A small miracle of nature, the note said. A chill ran down his spine. Coincidence, he told himself. Just his subconscious dredging up memories buried by trauma. But why that specific waterfall? Why the butterflies? And why now? At the construction firm where he had worked for over a decade, Ethan was known for his unwavering rationality. If it can't be calculated, it doesn't exist, he used to say, much to the irritation of more superstitious colleagues. But now, driving through the streets of Chicago on his way to work, his gaze was drawn to a sign on a corner of Michigan Avenue. The image of the Virgin Mary, identical to the one on the medallion, announced a novena for the health of the sick. At the nearby church, Ethan almost lost control of the car when he saw the date. It would begin that very evening at 7 p.m. This is ridiculous, he muttered to himself as he parked in front of the construction firm's building. But at 6:45 p.m. that same day, defying all the logic that had always guided his life, Ethan found himself sitting in the back pew of the church, feeling as out of place as a fish out of water. White candles illuminated the altar, creating dancing shadows on the old walls. The smell of incense mingled with the murmur of prayers. Ethan observed everything with scientific detachment, cataloging each detail as he would the materials for a construction project. And then, it happened. All the candles extinguished simultaneously, as if an invisible gust of wind had swept the altar. All except 3, which remained lit, forming a perfect triangle. At the same instant, an unmistakable scent of jasmine filled the air. Helen's perfume, the perfume she had worn since the day they met, and which Ethan hadn't smelled since the accident. His heart raced. He looked around, searching for anyone showing surprise at the phenomenon, but the faithful continued their prayers as if nothing had happened. Had he been the only one to witness it? The next morning, an emergency meeting at the construction firm announced a new project. The structural assessment of an eco-resort under construction in the Appalachian Mountains, less than 5 miles from the waterfall in his dream. "We need someone who can relocate there for a few weeks," the director explained. "The terrain is unstable and we need to ensure the foundations are adequate." Before any other colleague could volunteer, Ethan was already on his feet. "I'll go," he said with a conviction that surprised everyone, including himself. 2 weeks later, Ethan was driving along the winding road that cut through the Appalachian Mountains. The closer he got to the waterfall region, the more intense that feeling of urgency became, the one that had accompanied him since the dream. It wasn't just about the professional project. Something was waiting for him in those mountains, something he couldn't explain. The small inn where he stayed was a short walk from the waterfall. From his room window, he could hear the distant murmur of the water. The place was simple, run by an elderly couple who welcomed Ethan with the characteristic hospitality of rural Appalachia. "Are you here for the waterfall?" asked Martha as she served fresh coffee in a ceramic mug. "I'm here for work," Ethan replied automatically. "I'm an engineer, assessing a project nearby." The woman smiled like someone holding a secret. A lot of people say that when they arrive. But the waterfall has its own plans for those it calls. Ethan frowned, intrigued. "What do you mean, calls?" "The waters of awakening aren't just any waterfall, son," she explained, sitting down at the table. "The old folks say it chooses. Who needs it? Appears in dreams, sends signs." A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. "What kind of signs?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Everyone gets a different one. For some, it's birds of impossible colors. For others, sounds no one else hears. She paused, looking out the window. For my husband, it was 3 blue butterflies that appeared the day our son was at death's door. Ethan almost dropped his mug. And what happened to your son? Martha's smile widened, illuminating her wrinkled face. He's out back chopping wood for the stove. That was 40 years ago. The doctors said he wouldn't make it through the night. But the waterfall, it has its own plans. That afternoon, after a meeting at the construction site, Ethan couldn't resist the call he'd felt. Since arriving, he took a narrow trail that snaked between ancient trees, climbing higher and higher until the sound of the water became deafening. And then, rounding a large boulder, it appeared before him. The waterfall from his dream, exactly like the photograph, exactly like his nighttime vision. Water cascaded in silvery sheets over dark rock formations, creating a deep blue natural pool. The surrounding vegetation was lush, with giant ferns and colorful bromeliads that seemed like guardians of this sacred place. Ethan approached the edge, mesmerized by the sight. He knelt and touched the cold water with his fingertips, feeling an inexplicable current of energy flow through his body. She called you, didn't she? The deep voice startled him. Turning quickly, Ethan found himself facing an elderly man with sun-tanned, time-worn skin, white hair tied back in a ponytail, and piercing dark eyes. He carried a small bag made of natural fibers, from which emanated an intense aroma of herbs. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, standing up. "Just someone who knows these waters well," the old man replied, approaching slowly. "My name is Karai, a descendant of the Cherokee who first inhabited these lands." Ethan watched the man suspiciously. "What do you mean, she called me?" Karai smiled, revealing surprisingly white, straight teeth. "The waterfall. She calls those who need her. Appears in dreams, sends messengers." He paused, looking intently at Ethan. "Blue butterflies, perhaps?" The shock must have been evident on Ethan's face because the old man nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "As I thought. Come sit with me. I have something to show you." Reluctant yet irresistibly curious, Ethan followed the old man to a small clearing near the waterfall. Karai opened his bag and took out various plants, some dried, others still fresh. "These herbs," he explained, "grow only around this waterfall. Nowhere else in the mountains. My ancestors used them to awaken dormant spirits." "Dormant spirits?" "When the body lives, but the spirit is lost," Karai said, crushing some leaves between his calloused fingers. "As happens in great traumas. As happened to your family." Ethan felt his blood run cold. "How do you know about my family?" The old man didn't answer directly. Instead, he held out his hand and placed some crushed leaves, a vibrant green, into Ethan's palm. "Take this to the hospital. Make a tea and moisten their lips with it. At the next full moon, bring them to the waterfall." Ethan looked at the herbs in his hand, torn between the skepticism that had always guided his life and the inexplicable certainty that this encounter was no coincidence. "Why are you helping me?" Karai stood up slowly, leaning on a dark, intricately carved wooden staff. "The waterfall chooses its messengers, just as it chooses those who need healing. Today it's me. Tomorrow it might be you for someone else." He started to walk away but stopped and turned back to Ethan one last time. "Oh, and that lady from the hospital, the one who gave you the medallion. She came here once too, many years ago. Ask her about the 3 candles." And with that, he disappeared among the trees, leaving Ethan petrified, with 1,000 unanswered questions and a handful of mysterious herbs in his hand. The next 3 months were a whirlwind in Ethan's life. He divided his time between work in the mountains, supervising the resort's foundations, visits to the hospital in Chicago, where Helen and the twins remained unchanged in their deep sleep, and, to his own surprise, increasingly frequent participation in the religious services of the small local church. The tea from Karai's herbs became part of his routine. On each hospital visit, he discreetly moistened Helen's and the girl's lips with the green, aromatic liquid. feeling simultaneously ridiculous and hopeful. No visible change occurred, but Ethan couldn't abandon the ritual. During one of these visits, he noticed a nurse he hadn't seen before. Young with dark hair and tanned skin, she was adjusting Lucy's IV when something around her neck caught Ethan's attention. A medallion identical to the one he had received from the mysterious old woman. "Nice medallion," he commented, trying to sound casual. The nurse smiled, touching the small golden object. "Thanks, it's from my grandmother. She always said the Virgin Mary saved her when she was a child." "Is your grandmother from Chicago?" Ethan asked, feeling his heart speed. "No, she grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, near a waterfall they say has healing powers. Waters of Awakening, have you heard of it?" Ethan felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the wall to keep from falling. "Yes," he managed to reply. "Actually, I'm working near there now." The nurse's eyes lit up. "What a coincidence. My name's Marina, by the way. I started here 2 weeks ago." "Ethan," he introduced himself, shaking her outstretched hand. "These are my wife, Helen, and my daughters, Anna and Lucy." Marina looked at the patients tenderly. "I know all about them. I read their charts. It's a difficult case. The doctors say there's no hope," Ethan said, his voice choked. "But I can't accept it." The nurse hesitated, as if considering whether or not to say something. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "My grandmother used to say that when medicine gives up, it's time to seek ancient wisdom." 4 months after the accident, Ethan met with Dr. Rodriguez, the neurosurgeon responsible for his family's case. To his surprise, he ran into him not at the hospital, but leaving the church where he now regularly attended novenas. "Dr. Rodriguez?" he called out, incredulous. The doctor turned, equally surprised. "Mr. Miller? I didn't expect to see you here." "Nor you," Ethan admitted. "I always thought doctors were, well, purely scientific," Rodriguez completed with an understanding smile. "Many are, but some of us have learned that there are mysteries science still can't explain." He paused, observing Ethan attentively. "How are you coping with everything?" "One day at a time," Ethan replied, feeling strangely comfortable talking to the doctor outside the hospital setting. "Actually, besides the hospital visits, I've been spending a lot of time in the Appalachians. There's a waterfall there. The Waters of Awakening?" Rodriguez interrupted, stunning Ethan. "You know it?" The doctor nodded slowly. "I grew up in that region. My mother used to take me to that waterfall when I had a high fever. Said the water had special properties." He hesitated, as if weighing his next words. "Look, Mr. Miller, as a doctor, I can't endorse alternative treatments without scientific proof. But as a human being," his voice faltered, "I've seen things at that waterfall I couldn't explain in any medical journal." A new light dawned in Ethan's eyes. "Doctor, is there any possibility of taking my family there? Their condition is too delicate for conventional transport." Rodriguez pondered, his brow furrowed with concern. "We'd need a fully equipped ambulance. Medical team permits? It's complicated and extremely expensive." "Money isn't an issue," Ethan stated with a conviction he didn't truly feel. The truth was, his finances were rapidly deteriorating, with hospital costs and reduced work hours. As if to confirm his worries, the following week he received the news he dreaded. The construction firm was abandoning the project in the Appalachians. "Financial problems with the client," the director explained, asking Ethan to return to Chicago to take on other projects. It was as if the universe was testing his resolve. Staying in Chicago meant more financial stability, desperately needed for hospital treatments. But something inside him, something far beyond reason, insisted that the path to his family's recovery lay through the waterfall. That night, alone in his apartment, Ethan did something he never would have imagined. He knelt before the small Virgin Mary medallion placed on a makeshift altar table and prayed. Not formal memorized prayers, but a sincere, desperate plea for a sign, for direction. "If all this isn't just coincidence," he murmured, "if there really is some greater purpose, I need to know. I need to be sure." In response, a monumental storm broke over Chicago in the early hours. Ethan woke with a start to the crash of thunder so powerful, it made his window panes vibrate. He ran to the window just in time to see a gigantic bolt of lightning split the sky and strike precisely the large tree in front of the hospital where his family lay. The next morning, upon arriving at the hospital, he found unusual activity in Helen's room. Doctors and nurses hurried about, checking monitors and making notes. "What happened?" he asked Marina, alarmed, as she left the room. "Something extraordinary," she replied, her eyes shining with excitement. "Exactly at 3:17 a.m., your wife's EKG registered a significant change. It was brief, just a few seconds, but definitely a shift from the pattern that had remained constant since the accident." At 3:17 a.m., Ethan repeated, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Are you sure about the time?" "Absolutely. Why?" "Because that's exactly when lightning struck the tree in front of the hospital," Ethan explained, his voice trembling. "I saw it from my apartment window." Marina's eyes widened. "That can't be a coincidence. Does Dr. Rodriguez know?" "Yes. He was called immediately." "But..." She hesitated. "But?" "He said that scientifically, it could just be a random fluctuation in electrical impulses. It happens sometimes with no clinical significance." Ethan felt frustration rising. "And what do you think?" Marina glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "I think your wife responded to the lightning's energy, and I think my grandmother would call that a sign." That same afternoon, Ethan made the hardest and yet easiest decision of his life. He resigned from the construction firm. He would use his savings and sell whatever necessary to stay in the Appalachians, near the waterfall, and to try to bring his family there. With Marina's help, who requested a transfer to a hospital closer to the mountains, Ethan discovered a traditional community near the waterfall. These were families who had lived there for generations, preserving knowledge that blended folk Catholicism with indigenous traditions. They performed healing rituals in the waterfall's waters, especially during the full moon of the winter solstice, when, according to local tradition, the waters reached their maximum healing potential. Karai, the old healer Ethan had met months earlier, was respected as a sage within the community. Under his guidance, Ethan began preparing for the great challenge, transporting Helen and the twins to the waterfall for the solstice ritual, which would take place in exactly 2 months. Hospital bureaucracy seemed insurmountable. Forms, authorizations, risk assessments, each step was a new obstacle. Dr. Rodriguez, despite his sympathy for the situation, became increasingly reserved about the feasibility of the transport. "Understand, Mr. Miller," he explained in his office. "Even if I personally believe in the powers of that waterfall, medicine has protocols. I can't risk worsening your family's condition. But you also can't guarantee they'll improve by staying here," Ethan countered, with an intensity that surprised them both. "They've been in these beds for 8 months without any significant progress. What do we have to lose?" The doctor sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Look, there's a theoretical possibility. If we can secure a fully equipped ICU, ambulance, a specialized medical team, and all the necessary permits, maybe, and I emphasize maybe, we could attempt a temporary transport to the region." A ray of hope lit up Ethan's face. "And how much would all that cost?" "More than most people can afford," Rodriguez admitted. "We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars." Ethan's smile faded. His savings wouldn't come close to that amount, even after selling his car and putting his apartment up for sale. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not when they were so close to the date the entire community awaited with anticipation. The winter solstice full moon. It was at this critical moment that what Ethan could only call divine providence occurred. Returning to his Chicago apartment to retrieve his last belongings before moving permanently to the mountains, he discovered the place had flooded due to a burst pipe on the floor above. Among the damaged items were several folders of documents, including the family's original medical records. Normally, this would be a catastrophe, but when Ethan went to the hospital to request copies, he found that the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Rodriguez's superior, was on vacation. Temporarily filling in was Dr. Carmen Silva, an experienced physician who, to Ethan's astonishment, was born and raised in the same Appalachian region. "Waters of Awakening," she repeated, when Ethan mentioned the waterfall during their conversation about the new records. "My goodness, I grew up swimming in that water. My aunt swore she was cured of paralysis there." "Doctor," Ethan felt hope rekindle. "I'm trying to get my family there for the solstice full moon ritual. But Dr. Rodriguez says the costs are prohibitive." Dr. Silva reflected for a moment, drumming her fingers on the desk. "Well, it just so happens the hospital recently received a donation of new ICU transport equipment. We need to test it under real-world conditions before officially incorporating it into our fleet. It would be an excellent case study." She smiled conspiratorially. "And I'm sure Dr. Rodriguez would agree to personally lead this test run to ensure the patient's complete safety." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. That would be a miracle, Doctor." "A miracle would be your girls waking up, Mr. Miller," she corrected gently. "This is just science being put to the service of humanity. And maybe, just maybe, a little faith too." In the 10th month after the accident, during a lonely vigil at the hospital, Ethan witnessed something that nearly stopped his heart. 3 blue butterflies, exactly like the ones in his dream, landed on the window of the room where his family rested. They remained there, motionless, as if observing the patients for almost 10 minutes before taking flight and disappearing into the night sky. The next morning, checking the overnight records, the doctors found something inexplicable. At 3:17 a.m., the same time as the lightning incident months earlier, Anna, the older twin, by just 2 minutes, as Helen always made sure to point out, had shown the first significant brain activity since the accident. "It's not conclusive," Dr. Rodriguez cautioned, analyzing the graphs with a puzzled expression. "But it's definitely something we haven't seen before." With the solstice date approaching, Ethan intensified his preparations. The community around the waterfall also mobilized. Under Karai's guidance, they performed preparatory rituals, always in groups of 3, representing, as the old healer explained, the body, mind, and spirit. Complete healing only happens when the 3 are in harmony, he taught, while preparing infusions with the special herbs that grew only on the waterfall's banks. "Your wife and daughters lost that harmony in the accident. The waters can help restore it, but only if you are also in balance." Ethan, who a year ago would have laughed at such explanations, now absorbed every word like a thirsty man in the desert. He learned to light candles in triangular formations, to recite ancient Cherokee prayers blended with Catholic ones, to recognize the signs of nature that, according to Karai, were the waterfall's way of communicating. Finally, 1 year after the fateful accident, everything was ready. The special ICU ambulance with Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Silva, and Marina as part of the medical team transported Helen and the twins to a small rural clinic just 2 miles from the waterfall. From there, on the exact day of the solstice, they would be carried on special stretchers to the banks of the Waters of Awakening. The full moon that night was indescribably beautiful. Hanging in the sky like a polished silver disc, it illuminated the path of the small procession carrying the sleeping patients to the waterfall. The local community followed in respectful silence, each person carrying a candle that flickered gently in the night breeze. When they reached the waterfall's edge, the moon's reflection in the water created a hypnotic spectacle. The cascade, usually vigorous, seemed to have softened its flow, as if respecting the solemnity of the moment. Karai waited near a flat rock formation where the stretchers were carefully placed. He had prepared a natural altar, decorated with wildflowers, quartz crystals, and 3 clay bowls containing the special herbs. "It is time," the old healer announced, as the clock struck exactly midnight. "The moon is at the peak of its power. The waters are ready to receive." Following his instructions, Ethan carefully removed the tubes and electrodes connected to his family, under the watchful eyes of the doctors monitoring vital signs with portable equipment. With the help of Karai and other men from the community, he gently immersed first Helen, then Anna, and finally Lucy into the crystal-clear waters. The water temperature, surprisingly warm for a winter night, created a light mist over the surface. Karai began chanting in Cherokee, accompanied by the murmur of the community's prayers. Ethan, waist-deep in water, held the three women of his life, keeping their faces above the surface. It was then that the inexplicable happened. The reblubio butterflies, the same ones from his dreams, the same ones he'd seen at the hospital window, emerged from among the trees and flew in circles above them. The water around them began to emit a soft glow, as if thousands of tiny stars had dissolved into it. And at the exact moment midnight and 1 minute registered on Ethan's watch, he felt the movement. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely real. Anna's fingers moved slightly against his arm. Not an involuntary spasm, but a conscious movement, like a caress. "Anna," he called, his voice thick with emotion. The girl's eyes opened slowly, confused, disoriented but alive. Alive in a way they hadn't been for a year. "Daddy?" she murmured, her voice hoarse from the long period of inactivity. "Where are we? Why are we in the water?" A cry of joy escaped Ethan's throat, startling the butterflies which flew away only to return moments later. Tears flooded his eyes as he hugged his daughter against his chest. "At the waterfall, my love," he answered between sobs of joy. "We're at the waterfall that brought you back to me." The doctors rushed into the water, incredulous. Dr. Silva and Dr. Rodriguez checked Anna's vital signs. She seemed confused but fully awake and conscious. Marina, meanwhile, noticed something in Helen, a slight tremor in her eyelids, the first sign that she too might be returning. Karai observed everything with a serene smile, like someone not truly surprised by the miracle he was witnessing. When Ethan's eyes met his across the bustling crowd, the old healer simply nodded, a silent, "I told you so." In the following hours, as Anna was stabilized in the small rural clinic and Helen showed increasingly clear signs of awakening, Ethan had a chance to reflect on the incredible journey of the past year. From skeptical engineer to fervent believer, from a lonely man to part of a community, from desperate to hopeful. The true miracle, he realized, wasn't just Anna's awakening or Helen's promising signs. It was his own transformation. In his desperate search for a sign from heaven, he found much more than he expected. He found a new way of seeing the world, where science and faith weren't opposites, but complementary, where rationality and mystery could coexist in harmony. Lucy, the youngest, hadn't yet shown signs of improvement, but Ethan no longer felt the despair that had consumed him for so long. Now there was hope. Not the fragile hope of someone clinging to any possibility, but the deep certainty of someone who had seen the impossible happen. The next morning, as the sun rose over the Appalachian Mountains, Ethan took Anna, now in a wheelchair, still weak but smiling, to see the waterfall again. Helen remained at the clinic showing continuous progress, her eyes already opening for moments, recognizing faces, squeezing hands when asked. "Daddy," Anna called, as they watched the waters dance over the stones. "I dreamed about this place. The whole time I was asleep. I dreamed that 3 blue butterflies showed me the way back." Ethan stroked his daughter's hair, unable to hold back the tears. "I know, my love, I know." In his shirt pocket, the small medallion of the Virgin, Mary felt warmer than ever. Ethan took it out and gently placed it around Anna's neck. "A very special lady gave me this," he explained. "She said, 'When heaven speaks, listen,' and I listened." Anna smiled, touching the medallion with her still fragile fingers. "And what did heaven say, Daddy?" Ethan looked at the waterfall, at the butterflies dancing over the crystal clear waters, at the infinitely blue sky stretching over the Appalachian Mountains. Then, he turned his eyes to the daughter medicine had given up on, to the wife beginning to awaken in the clinic, and thought of the long journey they still had ahead to fully recover Lucy. "Heaven said, my daughter," he finally replied, "that the greatest miracles aren't the ones we can see or touch. They're the ones that happen inside us, when we learn to have faith even in the darkest moments." The 3 blue butterflies flew over father and daughter one last time before disappearing into the horizon. But Ethan knew they would return. Whenever someone needed a sign, a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, dawn always comes. And when heaven spoke again, he would be ready to listen.